All right, and we are back with another Lunch with a Lawyer live. And today's guest is not only special to me, but he is special to the entire Bosnian American community, and not just in the St. Louis area. I want to say the entire Bosnian American community in the United States. My dear friend Patrick McCarthy. Patrick, welcome. Thank you so much for
Thank you for having me.
It is an honor to really know you. It really is.
Mhm.
I just look up to you. I think what you have done, within the Bosnian community and with your life with that, it's just amazing. So thank you from the bottom of my heart in the name of the Bosnian American community. Thank you. And so today, I guess we can just talk a little bit about you. I asked you earlier, how did you really get involved with the Bosnian community? Because I know you were there, you were in Bosnia during the war. How did you get to be there?
Right. It's a question that I get asked a lot, or I was asked more in the past. I don't have, or I didn't have at the time, a family connection to the former Yugoslavia, but like a lot of people, I was following it in the news and saw what was going on in terms of the aggression against Bosnia and Herzegovina. And when the war and the conflict rose to the level of genocide, I think a lot of us felt called to respond, even though our governments weren't doing anything effective to stop the war. Not only our government, but the governments of the world. And it felt like at that point, individuals and groups had to try to respond in some way. So I have worked at St. Louis University now for almost 30 years. And we had a speaker come, a journalist who had been in Sarajevo, had just returned from Sarajevo, and he came back and he said, at a presentation that I attended on campus, the basic premise that we've been presented with in our media of age-old ethnic animosities that are almost like a natural occurrence in the Balkans. You can't really do anything about it. He said that's a false narrative. That's a convenient narrative so that our government can be absolved of responsibility. He said the truth is, in places like Sarajevo, people have not only just lived together for years, that they've had an interdependent life, a mutual common life in cities and small towns and villages throughout Bosnia and Herzegovina, and that idea of people living together represented civilization, that was the basis upon which all of our societies are organized, that are stable and prosperous and have those kinds of benefits. So I approached this journalist afterward and said, I'd like to help out. I don't know exactly how to do that. I'm here at the university. And he mentioned an effort to find scholarships for young Bosnians who had been studying, and their studies had been cut short by the war. And it was an effort called the Bosnian Student Project. And I organized a chapter of that national effort in St. Louis. And St. Louis University agreed to give a scholarship to a young woman, Vildana Bajric, who was studying in Sarajevo when the war started. She is originally from Travnik and had been living in Croatia as a refugee. She came to campus. Then I began to meet some of the local Bosnians who were here, began to work with them and trying to find ways to be of support. And I was invited to go to Sarajevo as part of a delegation in August of 1994, when the war was still going on. And our objective was to get to Sarajevo to provide support, some humanitarian assistance. And we did that by bus, starting in Herzegovina, got to the outskirts of Sarajevo, to Mount Igman, ended up the last part on foot and through a tunnel that had been dug underneath the Sarajevo airport. And that was my entry point and the way that I got out of Sarajevo. And it was a really profound experience for me to see the reality of what we had allowed, that Serbs had encircled the city. There were 10,000 people who were killed during the 3.5-year siege of Sarajevo, including 2,500 children. And aid workers at the time called it the world's largest concentration camp. And I was part of a generation that had been raised and schooled on never again, the idea of never again would we idly and passively allow for the destruction of a people based only on their religion or ethnicity. And again, we were seeing it happen in Sarajevo and in other places. So I felt a very strong pull, came back, began to work more with refugees, other students, and have continued that work, and really a love affair with Bosnia and Herzegovina and Bosnians for now 25 years.
So you were one of the few people that actually got in and got out of Sarajevo during the siege, and that you saw everything happen, firsthand. And so you have continued to stay involved within the Bosnian American community, and you have seen us come in, the early folks, the wave, and then you have seen the highs, the lows, the successes, the failures of the Bosnian community. In your experience, how has the Bosnian American community adapted to St. Louis, and what can you tell us about that?
I am so inspired by what I've seen from my Bosnian friends in terms of resilience, the ability to literally start over in a new place with the shirt on your back, more or less, in some cases, with high degrees of trauma from the war, of great loss that includes the loss of a home, of a culture, of family members. Just, it was almost inconceivable to me how it was even possible to just sort of put one foot in front of another and function. And of course, our society requires that. It always seemed harsh to me at first that people were kind of thrown into the deep end of the pool and said, you've got to swim, you got to learn to speak the English language, you have to get a job. We have limited amounts of assistance that at that time and now that is offered to refugees. And what I realized in the long run of seeing how people's lives have progressed and evolved is that was actually a good thing. In most cases, it allowed people to get on their feet, to have a sense of their self-worth reestablished, to feel good about the money they had earned, the place they had earned. And Bosnians and South Slavic cultures in general have a very strong work ethic. They are tightly connected as family. And so they impress St. Louisans with that work ethic, with the desire to succeed and to do well. And I'm just astounded and so delighted really to see how well Bosnians have done. So I contrast that a little bit with how things are going back at home in Bosnia and Herzegovina, because I travel there on a fairly regular basis.
Yeah, you've probably been more to Bosnia than I have.
And I think the stability that Bosnian Americans have achieved here is remarkable for all the reasons we've mentioned. If you say the context out of which they came was such an incredible obstacle, that overcoming that developed skills and resilience and resources that might not have been otherwise available. But when I look at the goal of stability at home in Bosnia and Herzegovina, stability, of course, is a very important goal, especially in the aftermath of the war. But the basic resolution of the war from the Dayton Peace Agreement was a division of the country, and I believe in a unified Bosnia and Herzegovina that has a single capital of Sarajevo and one functioning government and institutions. And I'm concerned about how things are going and what the degree of there is a stability on the surface, but I think some of the underlying dynamics are still those that could lead to future conflict, and not just in Bosnia and Herzegovina, but in the region more generally. And we can talk in a minute about what's coming up in October at Washington University that tries in a way to get at some of those questions.
Yeah, and we talked previously about that. I had some guests from Platform for Progress, people trying to make a difference, trying to get diaspora involved to kind of transfer some of the stability that the diaspora has established here to Bosnia and Herzegovina.
Right.
And yesterday I talked to Ron Klutho about, and I think you're going to agree with the both of us, that Bosnian Americans have really embraced the American dream more so than Americans themselves that have lived here their entire lives, because they have come from that nothing, and they were given this opportunity to achieve something. And so let me ask you this, and then I talked to the Platform of Progress people that are trying to get the diaspora organized and get them to vote and try to make a difference in Bosnia, because right now the status quo, as you call it, has been going on since the Dayton Agreement. Nothing's changed. And my wife always asks me, why should we be voting and making a change for Bosnia when, personally, I haven't been to Bosnia since 2014. Obviously, I try to go as much as I can, but a lot of us just can't for whatever reasons. Is it right for the diaspora to influence what's happening in Bosnia?
The simple answer is yes. And the reason is, if you look at the population of Bosnia and Herzegovina at the time the war began, of 4.4 million, 2 million Bosnians were either internally displaced or made refugees. That's almost half the population. And when you look at people who came from cities and towns that are part of the so-called Republika Srpska, the Serbian national agenda of separation, of denying the legitimacy of Bosnia and Herzegovina as a sovereign state, the attempts to influence a nationalist agenda linking to Serbia itself is a very, very disturbing trend. And I believe especially people who were expelled from a country did not give up their franchise to be part of the democratic process to determine what the future will be. God willing, there will be a Bosnia and Herzegovina now and into the future, and the direction of that will be based on political choices and commitments that people make. I admire Mirsad Hadjikajic. He is a friend of mine. He has organized several large organizations made up of diaspora Bosnians and Herzegovinians here in the United States, including the Advisory Council for Bosnia and Herzegovina, the Bosnian Herzegovinian American Academy of Arts and Sciences. He is a recognized expert in his field. He is a esteemed professor at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. In other words, he didn't really need to do what he's doing now. He's had a successful life in the United States, as now have had many others who are in a similar situation. But his belief is, as I mentioned before, what will the future be? What will the future look like? And I respect that he has a vision for Bosnia and Herzegovina that's all-inclusive, that includes all communities. Bosnia and Herzegovina was an exception in the former Yugoslavia, that there was not a single dominant religious or ethnic group that formed the majority. And so Bosnia was always understood as a place for everyone. That's an idea to get back to. But I think it's a way to honor those who were lost in this war. To the proper memorial for them would be a decent future for people who are still in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and those who care about Bosnia, including the large diaspora in St. Louis and in other places.
I tend to agree with that. I think Mirsad's heart in the right place, because I think a lot of Bosnian politicians right now are only there for the chairs, we call it in Bosnia.
Right.
Mirsad, really, he's not taking any money from the government. He is doing it all on his own. And he, as you said, he didn't really need to do that stuff. He's doing it because he wants to help, and I think
he did surprisingly well, having no party affiliation when he ran the first time, and captured almost 10% of the vote. There is a desire, I believe, as an outsider, but I think reasonably well informed about Bosnian society, there is a desire to see a political party that is committed to what works, that has a certain amount of pragmatism, that has real solutions, that's not tied to the past, and is not forming an agenda that advances only the interests of one group over and above each other. The dominant element in Bosnian politics, and sadly in American politics too, is the manipulation of fear, the fear of losing something that people, even the small gains that people have made, they're afraid to lose. And I think that the best of the Bosnian tradition was always to say, we're in it together, we rise or fall as a country and as a nation to the degree that we can work effectively together. I think there are hostile forces in the region and even within Bosnia, those for reasons that I can never understand, who don't identify themselves as Bosnians. I believe in a state comprised of citizens who have equal rights, no more, no less than any other, and their religious traditions are their own choice or not. And I think that that kind of civic organized state offers greater stability for the future than the course that has been followed in the last 25 years.
Yeah, and the facts are not a whole lot of progress has been made in the last 25 years, and I think it's time for change. I think people are ready for change, and I think Mirsad's coming along at that perfect time. So we'll see what the future brings. We'll see if he can mobilize the diaspora, because the diaspora is not only numbers are there, but also there's economic might that may be able to push that
forward. I think that's key too. I think, let's face it, Bosnians are Bosnians, and it's not natural for Bosnians to live apart from each other. From these separations are not part of Bosnian history, and I think Bosnians will always be redeemed by their sense of humor, their perspective, their enjoyment of life, their appreciation for social relationships. That's why so many people, including myself, were always so drawn to Bosnian culture, because it is such a rich, socially sophisticated culture of people who know how to deal with each other, who know how to solve problems, who understand that life is to be enjoyed, and the way that you do that is you enjoy it with your friends. And there's the Bosnian philosophy of you're always included, whether you are rich or poor. There's such a natural and strong sense of hospitality. That is the basis for building these other institutions, or reestablishing inclusive, interdependent institutions that function for the well-being of all Bosnians and all who are from Bosnia and Herzegovina. It's a lesson that, frankly, we could learn here. We are seeing more and more isolation, more and more sense of antipathy and division in our own culture. And I think if you trace some of these recent terrorist attacks in Australia, the person who committed that atrocity was influenced by Radovan Karadzic. The Norwegian terrorist attack was, again, someone who was follower of the extreme Serb nationalism. The germ of that hatred and division and, frankly, terrorism that was spawned by the world allowing the Serbian national project, and to a degree the Croatian national project. We have to acknowledge they were also an aggressor against Bosnia and Herzegovina. those ideas, if they're not stopped at the outset, will only be strengthened. And the kind of far-right populist governments that we're seeing in Europe now are one of the consequences that began with the wars of dissolution in the former Yugoslavia.
Wow. Far-reaching, it definitely has been. But you've always stayed active within the Bosnian American community, and you've always helped organize all kinds of, remembrances, and one is coming up in October, which I think is very, very important. I'm going to be taking part, and you will be there.
Yes.
So you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yes. So on October 4th, Friday, October 4th, 2019, on the campus of Washington University at the School of Law, and we'll make sure that we have a lot of information that comes out to the community about this, we'll have a day-long symposium that will look at the legacy of the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia in understanding the war and genocide in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And the opportunity arose by way of a film, a documentary film that was on Frontline about the trial of Ratko Mladic. And in fact, the first witness at the Mladic trial is a young man who lives here in St. Louis, Elvedin Pasic, who was just a boy when the events in his hometown near Kotovaras, where he lost his father, he gave direct testimony that led to the conviction of Mladic for genocide. And the chief prosecutor in that case, a man named Dermot Groom, will also be part of the symposium. So we'll look at the legal issues that were involved. Why was it so hard to establish the crime of genocide in Bosnia and Herzegovina when self-evidently genocide occurred not just in Srebrenica, which has been the focus, the central focus of genocide convictions in the War Crimes Tribunal. What was the role of Serbia as a state? Now, the ICTY, the Criminal Tribunal, doesn't have standing to prosecute states. It's only able to prosecute individuals. There is another court, the International Court of Justice, that did render a finding during the war of genocide against Serbia and Montenegro. But we see a narrative of genocide denial, even in the case of Srebrenica. But just take Prijedor, which came up at the end of the Mladic trial with the discovery of a mass grave at Tomašica. Very clear evidence of systematic, planned mass murder and genocide, and that legally that was not able to be established. So we'll look at why is it difficult to meet that threshold of the legal definition of genocide. Then we'll have a panel that will look at the political and historical issues related to that, the legacies of the tribunal. And then finally, a panel that will look at the experiences of Bosnians here in St. Louis, including Elvedin Pasic and others, younger members of the community who weren't even alive at that time. What does it mean for the tribunal to find and create a historical record of what actually occurred, and how does that help or not with the stability at home in Bosnia and Herzegovina? I think these are very important questions. They're difficult questions to deal with, and I understand that after 25 years, there's a natural inclination that people have to put these questions behind them, and I think that is appropriate to look to the future and to build a good life for yourself and for your families. That is a natural instinct. But again, I think to honor the memory of those who were lost in such an unjust war, in a war that we all lost so much, it deserves to have full accounting for these questions. And we'll do that at the program on October 4th. We'll end the day with a screening of that documentary film, and then Elvedin and Dermot Groom will have a question and answer period. So I'm very grateful to you, Nadine, for you'll be moderating the legal panel that'll look at issues of sexual violence. We'll look at the nature of the genocide and how it was planned and who the state actors were in Serbia that enabled and allowed that to happen.
And I'm really looking forward to this because, as you said, a lot of people don't grasp the concept that it was so self-evident what happened. So why was it so difficult, and why did it take so long to actually bring those trials to a conclusion? And I think those questions will be answered at that symposium because, we'll break it down to the layperson terms and explain to them, okay, the law says this, and here's the way it needed to go down in order for it to be properly executed. So really looking forward to that one, and I think it's going to be a good success. And as I said, you've been involved within the Bosnian community in keeping those memories alive. You're right, we need to move forward. We need to look into the future. However, it would just be a crime to ever forget those, memories.
I agree. And it's not an either-or equation. So I think that you can understand what happened. You can memorialize what happened, even as you look to the future, including, as we talked about before, political involvement and engagement in determining the future, a just future, a fair future, an inclusive future that's creating a stable, economically strong and prosperous and unified Bosnia and Herzegovina. That will be good for Bosnians here. That will certainly be good for Bosnians at home and for the whole region. So the degree to which Bosnia succeeds will help determine the future stability of that entire region.
That's very true. That is very true. So, Patrick, I do want to be respectful of your time. Is there anything that we have not covered that you would like to add to our broadcast today?
I do want to just add one thing. Those of you who missed the interview yesterday with Ron Klutha with Amir Amerikanats, do yourself a favor and find that podcast because it's really outstanding. And I want to give a shout out to Ron, who is another person who has really inspired me all these years with his tremendous dedication, and someone who doesn't ever seek the limelight and doesn't ever look for that kind of recognition. That kind of goodness is rare in the world, and we're lucky to have Ron here in St. Louis.
Very, very rare. It was such. I love Ron. I mean, there's just no other word to describe what you. There's nothing else that you can feel towards that man. He's such a likable human being. One thing he did mention, though, he said, obviously both, and maybe our viewers don't know this, but Patrick speaks Bosnian very well, and Ron speaks the language very well. But his saying is like, people think that I speak the language like a seljak, while Patrick is like one of those highly educated Bosnian speakers.
I had the advantage of learning a little bit from my mother-in-law, the proper structure of the grammar and things like that. So it's a running joke. I always say he speaks better. He says I speak better. But the truth is, neither one of us speak all that well. But
what I think is that you guys speak it better than some Bosnians themselves.
Maybe.
So I think
I don't know. Maybe younger Bosnians. Yeah,
that's very true.
Yeah.
So thank you very much, everybody, for being with us.
Thanks.
And Patrick, thank you so much for being with us.
My pleasure, as always.
And everybody have a wonderful rest of the day. Stay safe, and we'll be talking to you soon again. Okay?
Vidimo se.
Vidimo se. Ciao, ciao.